Hey everyone, welcome to the Eat to Win show where sports nutrition meets peak performance. Get ready for expert insights, real stories, and tips to help you win with every meal. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Winner's Circle and the Eat to Win podcast show. I am Margaret Downs, a registered dietitian and board certified specialist in sport. And we are here to talk about all things sports nutrition and how we can help athletes win. Whether you're an athlete or you're just passionate about nutrition, this is the place to be. Today, we are thrilled to have an amazing guest with us. Joining us is Stacy Lofton. She is a registered dietitian who will be breaking down healthy foods for muscle growth and sharing some really practical strategies to support healthy weight gain. She is a mother of 2 competitive athletes and has lived the life of trying to raise kids in sport. So we're really excited to have her with us today, and let's get started. Good morning, Stacy. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing great. And yourself?
I'm doing good. Thank you. So let's just start out talking a little bit about how you got here, how you developed a passion for sports nutrition, especially this area of fueling for muscle growth, which is so vitally important for any athlete, but especially those younger athletes who are preparing for college level and maybe college preparing for professional. So tell us a little bit about your history and how you got interested in sports nutrition.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've been a dietitian for more than 27 years. And through my kind of journey as a dietitian, I've worked in multiple roles, both clinically as well as corporately. But I think the thing that really drove my passion, number one, is my own personal experience as an athlete. So I, have made a lifelong commitment to fitness. And when I turned 40, I gifted myself a marathon. So I ran my first marathon. And I think through that journey, I learned so much about my body, about fuel. And it really kind of drove my interest in just learning more and looking at how I can help others in a way to just have that type of experience when it comes to just the relationship between food, your body, and performance. But even more than that was when I became a mom. And I have 2 kids. I have a son who's in college and a daughter who's getting ready to graduate high school. And my kids have been active for all their life. My son has played football since he's 5, and he now plays in college, and my daughter was a competitive gymnast and a dancer. And so nutrition has always been front of mind for us as a family. My husband is a coach as well. So, just that relationship alone it became my hobby in some regards to just what are ways that, I can keep my children fueled. But then as my son got to high school and muscle became a topic for him, it really challenged me in a way of, as a dietitian, but as a mom, how do you balance that? And Ashton, my son, has taught me so much in terms of how to work with athletes, because what we see as challenges and what they see as challenges, and even different stages of their life. When he's here at home, it's a much different conversation and experience to when he's away at college. And my son plays Division III. And, when you look at the resources that other colleges have in terms of nutrition, they don't necessarily have in place. So having, kind of building some of those resources and working with him within the, a dorm room or the resources he has really is much different. And the accountability to keeping him on track. It's funny, today we have a thing, he's taking just some vitamins and he never remembers. So I'm like, okay, as he's getting ready to leave, I'm like, how are we going to do this together? So I'm like, what if I'm like your coach, like Coach Mom, or you can call me Coach Lofton. I don't care, but I am texting you every day. So we have a plan. So we text, and that's how I keep him accountable. Whereas in other facilities, they may have someone who's there to hand him out, but I'm not there to hand him out, or someone isn't there to hand out. So his level of accountability changes. So it's just about, pivoting and learning from your athletes. We can really take our textbook knowledge, but sometimes that isn't how an athlete is ready or how they can apply. So how can you take your personal experience? And that's really, I think, what drives me as a practitioner is, how can I take my experience not only professionally, but also personally, as well as what has my own family or my own athletes taught me as a way to really help them be successful. So
Well,
that's
that is
really
just
kind of
awesome.
my own passion. So just a different take.
Well, yes. And I mean, I just think it's so cool because you do have all the background, right? The education and all the things leading up to being able to do this as a parent. But then you spoke about some very specific challenges that you've encountered with your own children and how challenging that is when you're trying to fuel that age group where they don't have that accountability
They
and
don't.
the skill set in place to really execute the things that they need to do. And so, wow, it sounds like you really noticed this as you were raising your own children. But was there a specific experience that you encountered as a practitioner where it really approached the way you kind of taught nutrition or led others to understand nutrition for muscle growth? Do you think that there was a change in your own professional way of thinking at any point in time?
Yeah, I mean, I think when just from the standpoint of, I think I have kind of a front row seat or kind of a dual lens when it comes to working with athletes. And the thing that really changed for me is, I could educate athletes or even educate my own kids, but it wasn't until they began to have an invested interest. But also going from working with my son preparing for college versus when he's in college really was a game changer for me because, again, I had a controlled environment at home. I could help him plan his meals. I could do the grocery shopping. I have a blender. When he gets to school, he doesn't have a car. We are relying on Instacart, on dining plans. He doesn't necessarily have the same tools and resources that we have at home. So it definitely was a shift. So, taking the basic knowledge that we built, but having to learn to apply it in a different way, his schedule was very inconsistent. And so it just, to me, just looking at what are their struggles, time constraints, motivation, that's a big one. When you don't have the community or the support, it really changes kind of what their motivation or what their drive is. And then again, their own convictions and their own knowledge versus sound nutrition knowledge, trying to have them see the benefit, experience the benefit, I find really makes a difference. You can tell an athlete exactly what they need to do, but I feel until they can actually experience it and see for themselves the benefit that comes from that, it really is hard to kind of move them along or to keep them committed.
Yeah. Well, that makes complete
Yeah.
sense. And you're 100% correct. I mean, I think that transition from high school to collegiate is so challenging. And then we also see a similar, challenge when they leave college sport and they go into real life,
And they go into real life. Yeah.
and they're having to adjust their eating patterns again because they've been so used to fueling for their sport, and then they may not be playing sports afterwards. So we've also seen weight
and
gain
that's
and
one
things
thing
occur.
that I think when I work with athletes, so when we look at weight gain and we look at the fact that they need to have a calorie surplus, oftentimes athletes just think it's just a calorie, and they just, eat foods that necessarily aren't supportive of their performance. They're just empty or kind of junkful calories.
Just getting that
And then-
energy.
Yeah. And honestly, it's just from a long-term standpoint or habit standpoint, they're going to have to work just as hard to change that once they get to their weight gain goals or their activity changes versus if we just teach them the right way and just different, different portions, different foods, but the basics, the foundation is still very solid. They just have to shift the foundation based on what their needs are in that time. And that's no different than when they're preparing, when they're training off season versus in season, to, life as an athlete, life as a post-athlete. My foundation is still the same, but how, what I put into that, the portion, the amount, what I need to do to balance, just changes. And how can we make that shift?
Absolutely. Well, Stacy, we are going to take a quick break. Stay with us as we take a short break and thank our sponsors. You're listening to the Eat to Win podcast with your host, Margaret Downs. Liquid Fuel is a new sports and hydration product formulated by a sports dietitian to give athletes the edge to train and compete longer. It contains low glycemic carbohydrate platinose designed to keep blood sugar levels more stable, to provide energy for 3 to 4 hours without the blood sugar crash seen in other leading sports drinks. Its unique 4-part electrolyte formula includes 50% of your daily magnesium need to optimize muscle function. Liquid Fuel is naturally sweetened, along with no artificial ingredients or colors. Currently being used by high school, collegiate, and professional teams, Liquid Fuel allows you to live life with confidence, knowing you're properly fueling your body. Visit drinkliquidfuel.com and use the code MSD10 to get 10% off your order. Okay, we are back, and this is Margaret Downs with the Eat to Win podcast show, and we are talking to Stacy Lofton, who is giving us a little bit of insight about approaching nutrition for muscle growth. I know that you have also been kind of linked into more recently trying to develop some programming for football athletes and those people who are interested in those weight gain sports. So tell us a little bit about what you're currently doing and how this applies to, your interest and where you're headed.
Yeah, absolutely. So with my sports dietitian, we have developed a program called Bulk Up, and it is an app-based program, both personalized for the athlete one-on-one and also from the team standpoint. So really just looking at kind of the foundation of, what do I need to do to put muscle mass on. And as we know, nutrition is such an important part. It's not the only part. An athlete needs to be in a very structured, straight training program, but nutrition is going to help complement that. So as I'm looking at, increasing my calories and looking at building bulk in that way, but also how's it going to correlate or coincide with what I'm doing on the strength side? So if I were to look at, just some advice I would give to an athlete for healthy weight gain, the first thing is to prioritize calories for growth. So, you need to be in a calorie surplus, but, that doesn't mean just, overeating foods. We need to look at the type of foods that we're eating, and protein is key, but I think one of the big myths when it comes to bulking up, and I see this almost unanimously with any athlete that I work with, is it's all about protein and protein supplements and protein drinks. And I really try to encourage my athletes or to take a step back and look at food first, supplements second. So let's really look at, how much protein do you need? And how can I always encourage my athletes to pace it through the day. I see a lot of athletes who skip meals and may backload nutrition late in the day. They eat meals that just have a large amount of protein but aren't balanced in other nutrients. And we just need to remember that protein is important, but again, nutrition is about a team. Just like they're on a team, nutrition is a team, and nutrients work together. They each have their specific roles, responsibilities, and functions, and we need to respect that. And we need to find ways to include that balance. So we work with athletes to look at not only how they can, pace their protein throughout the day, but carbs. Carbs are essential, probably one of the most important nutrients in the body. But what type of carbs and when is what type, going to give you the best performance.
It's
And then
so
also,
interesting to me how they've really sidelined carbohydrates, and
absolutely.
from this mainstream perception that there's something, and especially for an athlete, right? That this is the last thing we want to do is sideline these energy providing,
Yes.
central foods. But yet, because I think it's been such a big proponent on the weight gain side of like gaining too much fat, we've seen this correlation across, populations. And we want to be clear, right? When we're talking to athletes that they need carbohydrates.
Absolutely. I mean, if they want to perform, they need fuel, and protein doesn't necessarily fuel our body. Carbohydrates fuel our body. And so we need to have a balance, but understand, what does that balance mean? So I do a lot of work with athletes just to understand, what does a meal look like for me? And how do I kind of plan those throughout the day? So prioritize calories for growth. Again, yes, protein is key, but it's not the only. We need to consume enough protein. We need to pace it through the day, but we also need to put just as much emphasis on the carbohydrates that we take in. So whole grains, fruits and vegetables, as well as healthy fats. I think sometimes even us just in general shy away from that, but especially in an athlete who's looking to achieve a calorie surplus, healthy fats are key, because the more calories you need, it just becomes a volume of food that for some is very uncomfortable. But there's so many great ways that you can accomplish that and not do it in a way that you're uncomfortable or it starts to really impact your performance. So I
Right.
really try to help athletes take a step back and look at how variety and balance is so very important, just in addition to getting protein. Protein alone isn't going to build us muscles.
Yes. And I think that advantage of that plate method that you're referring to, just looking at
Yeah,
the balance of
absolutely.
foods on your plate and being able to really just articulate that it just looks out of balance or it looks in balance, and giving that kind of visual perception is very helpful too for this age group.
Yeah.
But Stacy, tell us a little bit too, because you've talked about some misconceptions and challenges with your own children. I mean, do you feel like they were receptive to your insights and your knowledge? How did you approach them, and were they receptive?
Yeah. I think it definitely was a transition. I said earlier, athletes need to be ready. They need to be ready to listen, to apply, and see for themselves what the benefit is. And I think with my own kids, that was very key. With my son, we really started working early, but it wasn't until, honestly, I would say, going into his senior year of high school, where he was something that he felt he wanted to take on. So I could coach him all along, but until he was like, I'm ready. And so that's where I think it really made a difference for us. And it's hard. It's hard for parents, and especially as a mom who's a dietitian who works in this field, it's kind of a hard line to draw. There's roles and responsibilities, kind of that division of responsibility. And for
Right.
each of us, it was kind of learning where those roles and responsibility. But like I said, it really wasn't until he felt like he had an investment. This is what his goals were, and how were we going to accomplish those goals? And then as he went off to college, it shifted and pivoted as well, because what we could do together, I wasn't there, there to make his meals or to make sure that he had food in the refrigerator or his meals were consistent, or to sit back and look at his day and say, okay, this is when practice is, this is when, you're traveling or what have you. And how can we kind of balance and fit things in to help him be prepared? And those are things that are on him now. So that's really kind of shifted our conversation and how, I work with him.
Yeah.
He's
How
an
cool.
adult, and, his investment is a little different than when he was younger or in high school. So for me, that's kind of how that division worked. And again, he's my greatest teacher.
It's awesome.
I love having that connection because it really just allows me to step back and think, okay, this is what real world for him is. It may not be for every athlete, but again, it just gives you a different perspective and really some grace when it comes to making recommendations, because perfection doesn't exist. The perfect meal, the perfect food, it's not there. And what's perfect is what works for the athlete. And you really got to look at their environment, their circumstances, what they like, what they don't like, what resources they have available. Do they clean up after themselves? Food safety is a big thing for me now. I mean, yeah, there's things that I probably wouldn't serve at home, but for a college student who lives in a dorm, I got to shift those priorities a little and look at things from a different perspective, because at the end of the day, I just want them to get consistent nutrition. And that just might have to look a little different for this period of time.
Well, it sounds like you've had some pretty receptive children. I mean, I can imagine that could go either direction depending on
Absolutely.
the child.
It always hasn't been a smooth, I get frustrated, but then I have to sit back and think, this isn't about me. This isn't about my knowledge. This is about him taking this information and finding a way to make it, something that works for him and can be long term. Because that's the thing with weight gain, is it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And we really want to focus on pacing our athletes through, gradual weight gain, sustainable weight gain, and helping them meet their long-term goals. And
I think that brings up sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but
no,
I think that brings up a really great question too, which is, what should athletes expect when they're trying to put on healthy weight? Like, what is a time frame for an individual in terms of putting on healthy muscle weight? How long does that take?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I often tell athletes, and, every athlete's different, every body's different. And, weight fluctuates so much, even in a given week. So oftentimes I don't like athletes when they weigh themselves on a daily basis. But if we do, I like to see 2, maybe 3 times a week, just so we can see or educate on the fact that, hey, weight fluctuates on any given day, but let's look at kind of what your body is doing on an average. And in general, I don't like to see, or I don't encourage more than a half to a pound a week, or more than 3 to 4 pounds a month. Obviously, some athletes are going to see, depending on where they are in their training or their development, they may see, a little more rapid, but then it settles down. So you really got to look at it, kind of the whole picture. But, we're just not, our body isn't, that's not natural to just put on. You're not going to put muscle in, large increments. And so I really try to slow them down and pace and look at, okay, what are we doing in the weight room? What's happening to your strength? Are you making progress with your training based on what your trainer or your coach is having you do? And how does that correlate with what we're seeing on the scale? And I really like to see them focus on the 2 aspects, because if we're just gaining weight and we're not gaining strength, then that usually is a really good indication that we're not necessarily putting on muscle mass, that we're just putting on fat mass. Yeah. So I really like to try to sit back and look at or help them see that a number is just not a number. It needs to have purpose, and we need to be patient, and we need to pace that. Just like we have to pace many things in our life, we need to also do that with our weight gain.
Well, I would probably be amiss. I mean, we got time for one more question. I kind of want to wrap up and get your final thoughts. But I do want to address this question, because I think it's a big one, and something that, this, especially high school kids, are probably prone to supplementing. And so, and I know college kids are also, in some cases limited to what they can and can't use depending on the league that they're playing in. But what is your take on the current trends in weight gain supplements? I mean, you talked earlier about food first, But
Yeah.
when is that time and point where you might say, okay, we need to look at something for this athlete that may be beneficial? And what might that look like?
Absolutely. Well, I think, supplements are such a growing industry, and it is, I think for many athletes, it's almost expected. I mean, that's almost where they go first. But I think
Yes.
many supplements are so overused. And like you said, I really like to focus on food first, supplements second. However, I think they absolutely have a place. Protein powders, for example. I like to see athletes look at and see that, yes, I can meet my protein through just eating regular meals and snacks. However, for some athletes, and I will be honest, my son included, we have to be creative because for him, with regular meals and snacks, depending on the given day, it's hard for him to have a solid snack. So, adding some whey protein powder to a milk to get his protein, but also give him some carbs after working out is much better than trying to pair all these things that I know he's not going to put in his backpack or is not going to be available because they don't have fueling stations within, their facilities, or
So that
depending on the
convenience
time of
factor
day.
might be,
Yeah,
a time
yeah.
is like, when
So
is
there's
convenient?
some core things, and
Right.
then for some athletes, I mean, I'm a big advocate of omega-3s. I am very much interested in concussion, especially being someone who works in football, but also as a mom of a running back. Every time I see impact, I think there's so much incredible research out there, and it is so solid when it comes to just brain health, but overall health, inflammation and what have you when it comes to omega-3. So that is one thing that I'm a big advocate. And I know food is a great source, but for many athletes, especially the high school and college, those are not things that they tend to eat, or honestly, from a budget standpoint, it's just not practical depending on their likes and dislikes. So I like to just have that baseline. And then a multivitamin, if there are certain foods that they just don't include. To me, it's just a safety net.
Yeah. Well,
I
those are
have
some really great
found some
options.
supplements that are packed together that are easy. So it's a one-shot deal. They're all third party certified. And it's very easy. They're not having to mix by multiple bottles. And it's just easy. But again, food, you can't replace food in a diet. And that's one thing that I think is so misunderstood, is that we just can't take a pill or drink a drink that's going to give our body everything that it needs, because there's so much in food that we just can't put in a pill. And just the joy of eating too.
Yeah.
Socially, just, there's enjoyment, there's comfort, and I want our athletes to experience that.
Yes, because they are very rushed. So it is important that they take that time to allow their body to chew and swallow their food. I mean, chewing
Absolutely.
is another big factor for digestion. If we're not chewing and using those salivary, the mastication in our mouth, I
Yep,
mean, that also affects
absolutely.
gut health. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I know I was working with a lot of athletes and collegiate for many years, and like they just didn't take time to eat. They were just so busy shoveling it as fast as they could in between activities,
Yeah.
and I'm like, slow down,
Yeah. And especially athletes who are trying to gain weight too.
Yeah.
It's like, that's how you're eating is not necessary. I mean, there's so many different ways we can do so you're not making yourself miserable. You're
Right.
hungry for the next meal. Because again, I want you to eat consistently, regularly throughout the day, just not in a one-shot deal.
Right.
Your
Right.
performance is going to be better. I think the
Mood.
outcome, the mood. Yeah.
Sleep.
So again, there's a
Yes.
lot of different things. We could talk for hours,
All
Marguerite,
day.
on
I
this.
know. Well, I really, really appreciate it. Gosh, Stacy, just so many wonderful insights from you. I know we're going to have you back on because we're not done, but we do have to wrap up for today. I just wanted to kind of get some final thoughts. Where do you see yourself or even the nutrition field in the next 5 years? especially regarding this topic with muscle growth. I mean, is there anything that you want to leave our listeners with as far as where this part of our industry may be headed, or what are some key takeaways?
Yeah. Well, I think nutrition is such an evolutionary field, and what we know today isn't necessarily what's going to be, the recommendations for tomorrow.
It changes fast.
It changes fast. Absolutely. But I think, for athletes now, again, just to be consistent with your meals. So to eat regular meals and snacks, to include protein with your meals, but know that it's not the only nutrient. We need a variety of carbohydrates, so whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. And we absolutely need to include healthy fats. So nuts, seeds, avocados, plant-based oils, they're all very, very important.
That's
when
terrific.
It comes to meeting the needs of any athlete, but especially when we're looking at, athletes who are wanting to gain and grow in terms of their strength and muscle.
Wonderful.
And then, in terms of, what is going to be happening in the future, I don't think supplements are going to go away. I think we just need to equip our athletes with the education so they can make informed decisions on what is and isn't or has a place within their plan, their training or performance.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be very, very key. I think there's so much in terms of technology and data. There's so many devices from our smartwatches to our rings that provide. So what is that going to do for our athletes? Are we going to get so granular and be able to do personalized nutrition for our athletes? I'm kind of intrigued by that. I'm really interested in gut health. I think that is fascinating.
Well, and especially for these younger ages,
Yes.
like getting the knowledge when you're younger so that you're not trying to fight fires when, you grow into that post-collegiate age and all of a sudden you've got irritable bowel syndrome that you've never been able to get rid of.
I think there's so much we can do with the younger athlete to prepare them. Because
chewing is a good start.
It is. It's such a game changer. It's just even for lifelong habits. So, there's so many different things.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Stacy, tell us how to get in touch with you in case any of our listeners want to follow up with you and your practice, and let us know how to contact you. And thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah. So I think the best way is through My Sports Dietitian. So Stacy at mysportsd.com. And also through their website, you can find my contact information and send me a message. So that would be the easiest way to get, especially, So if any questions,
we know how to find Stacy.
Yeah. So thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you. So that is it for today's episode of the Winner's Circle and the Eat to Win podcast show. Big thanks to Stacy Lofton for joining us and sharing her expertise. If you found today's insights valuable, be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your community. Also, do us a big favor and rate and review us. Until next time, keep winning.
Thanks for joining us on the Eat to Win show. Remember, every meal is a step toward victory. Until next time, stay strong and keep winning.